Chapter 6. The Kauravs. The rest of the four Pandav brothers, with a large battalion of soldiers, have now encircled Bhishma, Shikundi and Arjun, isolating these three. The Pandav each shot arrows at their grandsire, but Bhishma held up two shields, each on one side, and blocked them. The only opening was at his front and back, but the impenetrable armor he wore made all the arrows non-lethal. The grandsire was wounded still, and blood dripped down his armor and arms. He also looked out of breath, but held his ground. Yudhishthir threw a spear, but it was deflected by the shield. "Protect the general! Protect the grandsire!" the Kaurav army shouted out and tried to break through the encircling. Shikundi uselessly shot a few more arrows at Bhishma, while Krishna said to Arjun, "Bhishma's armor is made of the same alloy as his arrows. Our arrows won't penetrate easily, but you can still drop him, son of Pritha. The others won't be able to hold the horde of Kauravs for much longer. It's now or never, Arjun." Arjun smiled dryly and drew his Gandiv to full extent with an arrow. Then he aimed for the gaps between the gauntlets on his grandsire's arms. His arrows came one after the other, and Bhishma grunted with pain as he dropped his shields. Arjun's 4 arrows have gone halfway through both his upper arms and his elbow joints, dripping blood on the other side. While facing an archer, the neck is a vulnerable portion, but due to the flowing white beard of the grandsire, it was a difficult shot for Arjun. "I need a better angle. Move with me, Shikundi," Arjun instructed as Krishna moved the chariot circling around the grandsire's vehicle, while Shikundi's chariot moved along the rotating line of sight between the two. They came to the rear side of the grandsire's chariot, which lacked raised guard edges for ease of mounting and dismounting. Bhishma now turned around at that side, facing Shikundi and Arjun, still not ready to give up. Now Arjun aimed at the unarmored dhoti-clad legs of his grandfather and shot his next arrows through them. Shikundi joined in as they both shot, and the shafts punctured arteries, flesh and bones, emerging halfway on the other side. Holding onto the umbrella pole, the grandsire tried to fight against his collapsing legs, as the next set of arrows went the same way through other exposed parts of his arms. Some group from the Kaurav side screamed, as a part of their battalion has managed to break through the Pandav defenses. Arjun's last arrow hit the silver headgear of Bhishma and made it fly away. Holding onto the pole with his last bit of strength, the grandsire hung his face, his body now riddled with the number of shafts and a thin, gooey stream of saliva descending from between his paling lips. Then his hand slipped, and he fell on his back to the ground below, or almost. The arrowheads sticking out of his arms and legs buried themselves into the guts, blood, mud and bodies on the battleground, and Bhishma, the grandsire of the Kauravs, lay supported in the air by them. His head hung upside down. The Panchals and the other allies of the Pandav shouted aloud in joy at the downfall of the enemy general. Conchs were blown in celebration. "No, no," the Kaurav brothers, including Duryodhan, shouted, while the rest of the army were too stupefied to say anything. The battle stopped there, as joyful, confused or grieving, they all put aside their weapons and united as one for the fall of a great hero. Arjun put down his Gandiv and started weeping. As he descended from his chariot and crossing Shikundi, he sat down at the hanging head of his grandsire. With wet eyes, he cradled the old man's head on his lap and eased it to a proper position, whereafter he realized that Bhishma's breath was still not gone. Asking for a waterskin from Shikundi, he poured water onto the dying man's lips. I am on a bed of arrows," the grandsire spoke after he drank, with bloodshot eyes looking at Arjun, "the bed of a true warrior." Then the grandfather, who had once cradled on his lap the grandson, breathed his last on the lap of the same grandson. Kaurav military camp. Pressing his lips tightly, Duryodhan with glistening eyes sat at the head of the Kaurav war council. Around him, there were discussions and arguments going on between the leaders and commanders of his side, regarding their next course of action, now that their generalissimo and chief strategist was gone. Sanjay, a charioteer of King Dhritarashtra and the chronicler of the war, had been sent to Hastinapur to be the bearer of the bad news. The war must continue, that much was clear to Duryodhan. Neither he nor his allies were ready to surrender at any cost, and for him, the interests were more personal. He cannot let the Pandavs have the last laugh. But to continue the war, what they first need is someone to lead. They need their next generalissimo, but who can that be? Duryodhan looked around him at his commanders and chiefs, who made this military venture of his possible. He first considered Kritavarma, who led the Yadavs, and remembered how unexpected it was to get such a large portion of the Yadavs on his side, even when they have a marriage alliance with Arjun. Both Arjun and Duryodhan had gone to Krishna, the head of the Yadav oligarchy, to seek support before this war. Krishna had asked them either to choose him, alone and with a vow not to fight, or choose his personal trained battalion. What the rest of the Yadav chiefs will do would be up to them. Duryodhan had naturally chosen the battalion, while Arjun chose Krishna. He chose friendship over numbers, with the military balance tipping to Kaurav's side at this. Most Yadav, like Kritavarma, found it wise to join the Kauravs. But still many Yadavs fight from the other side, and Duryodhan cannot trust Kritavarma enough to lead this war against them. Another such unexpected inclusion was King Shalya of Madra, the maternal uncle of Nakul and Sahadev. Shalya and his army were supposed to join the Pandavs, but on their way to the amassing, they mistakenly stopped at rest areas set up by the Kauravs. Having enjoyed their hospitality for so long, the king felt ethically obliged to join the Kauravs. But to give him the responsibility of supreme commander was putting too much faith on his ethics, especially when he clearly expresses his disgust at having to serve the Kauravs. Alambush, Bhagadatta, Uncle Shakuni, all of them had their own set of skills, none of which included commanding armies. King Jaidrath was his brother-in-law married to his only sister, Dushala. His army excelled at surprise attacks and sieges, and that is the extent of Jaidrath's leading skills. Same can be said for King Sushama of Trigata. His own brothers were no options, as they lacked the wisdom. Even his closest brother Dushasan was more likely to start celebrating with courtesans after every day, rather than actually accomplishing something in the day worth celebrating. That said, it all boils down to four options: preceptors Drun and Kripa, Drun's son Ashwatthama, and Duryodhan's dear friend Karna. Ashwatthama was the governor of northern Panchal and his father's true son, who was one of the few archers who can take Arjun head-on. Another such archer was Karna, who Duryodhan feels blessed to have by his side throughout his life. Even though there is a several-year age gap between the two, their friendship is unbreakable. An orphan raised by a Kuru charioteer of mixed caste, Karna studied with the Kauravs and Pandavs under Kripa and Drun. Later Karna left their institution and received higher training from the Parashuram sect, only to come back and challenge Arjun. Duryodhan feels that his friend's rivalry with Arjun is what will help them turn the tides of this war. Now, with his grandsire out of picture, Karna is free to join the forces. Duryodhan leaned in towards Karna, who was seating closest to him, and he asked softly, "Who do you think should lead us now, pal?" Karna studied the people around him, busy in discussions in groups or sitting deep in thoughts. Most of your allies have hidden competition with each other. Making one the generalissimo can enrage the others. However, there's one who everyone here can agree to lead them, Preceptor Drun. He has been the preceptor of many of us here, and all revere him. Beside, his archery will overwhelm Arjun, who can never be better than his teacher. Excellently said. Duryodhan looked delighted and then spoke aloud to the council, bringing the rest to silence. After careful examination and considering wise counsel, I have decided that our next generalissimo should be Preceptor Drun. Here, everyone conceded, and the grey-bearded, taut-muscled Drun, with his long grey hair tied into a bun, stood from his seat and said with slight bow, "I am honored, King Duryodhan. I will use my knowledge of weapons and warfare to bring success to this endeavor. The enemy will not be happy to face me in battle." Even though Arjun was Drun's favorite student, and he personally had nothing against the Pandav's brothers, yet he was always determined to stand with Hastinapur, as the Kuru kingdom had once delivered him from his poverty and ill fate. Hastinapur, capital of Kuru kingdom. Dhritarashtra, the blind king sitting on the throne of Hastinapur and the father to the 100 Kaurav brothers, hung his head as tears flowed unstopped from his glassy white eyes. The Kuru assembly hall was nearly empty, as most of the chiefs, advisors and leaders were in the battlefield. There were only a few ministers, who were all devastated at the news of the fall of the Kuru grandsire. And Sanjay, the king's charioteer and war chronicler, stood at the center of the hall. "What is this news you brought us, Sanjay?" tearfully said Vijaya, the prime minister of the Kurus. "That great protector of the Kuru clan. No, we have all been orphaned." Vijaya was a bastard brother of Dhritarashtra and Pandu, raised by the grandsire himself. He was installed as the prime minister when Pandu was crowned the king, and he had served the throne since then dedicatedly as executor and advisor. However, he knew that the Pandavs, especially Yudhishthira, was the right choice of successor to the Kuru throne, no matter what his half-brother or his 100 sons thought. He had been trying to protect the sons of Pandu in every way he can, without betraying the throne. When Duryodhan and his companions made a plan to burn the Pandavs alive along with their mother Kunti, Vijaya was the one to tip them off. He also helped the six save themselves and go into hiding, making the evil plan look like a success for the time being. But soon things started slipping out of his control, and now there is an all-out war between the cousins. "So many of my sons, my blood, that Bhim took away," Dhritarashtra said, shedding more tears as his shoulders shook with grief and anger. "How could one spill the blood of their kin without care? How could one commit the sin of making a father childless and a child fatherless?" "Great king," Sanjay said while joining his palms at the throne, "everything that is happening is the consequence of your actions and the actions of your sons. It is not wise to blame anyone else for it." Vijaya sighed and said to the king, "I had told you, my lord, stop your son's evil deeds, but you never listened to me." "You know, I have tried, Vijaya," Dhritarashtra said, snorting through his tears, "but my son doesn't listen to me. I told him not to go to war, but—" "I am not talking about now," Vijaya said. "I am talking about what happened 14 years ago in the game assembly in your very presence. I had pleaded your sons and I had pleaded you, but none of you stopped what was happening. You let them dishonor a respectable woman married to your high clan. She will not forget it, and she won't let the Pandavs forget it either." Pandav military camp. It was the Pandav team's turn to celebrate and have a feast, for the first time in the long 10 days of battle. Nearby villagers have been employed to hunt and bring meat for the warriors and the commanders, although the lion's share was to go to the gourmand Bhim. Arjun was against the celebrations, but Yudhishthira convinced him to join, saying that the celebrations would keep the spirits of the warriors high. The main hero of the day was Shikundi, and everyone lauded him. But none of them realized yet that by felling the previous generalissimo, they had got themselves a more cunning strategist as their enemy commander.
To be continued. Stay tuned for the next chapter.